Hi, I'm Paul Arthur. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. U.S. President Donald Trump will impose a 25% tariff on all steel imports, including those coming from Canada. Plus, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Paris today for a global summit on artificial intelligence. And tragedy in Guatemala as a bus veers off a bridge, killing more than 50 people on board.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News.
Thanks for joining us. American President Donald Trump says he'll impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports into the U.S. today, and there will be no carve-outs for Canada. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he would implement matching tariffs on American steel and aluminum if he was Prime Minister. Poilievre says money collected by counter tariffs would go back to Canada's steel and aluminum industry, with any surplus used for broader tax relief. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet says there is no scenario where the U.S. will produce enough aluminum to replace what it gets from Quebec before the end of Trump's mandate. He told Trump that he was exposing America's cutting-edge industries to serious inflation and that he should negotiate instead. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Paris today for a global summit on artificial intelligence. He's among nearly 100 heads of state and government attending the two-day event in the French capital, which is covering topics including AI and the public interest and the future of work. Trudeau says artificial intelligence needs guardrails, transparency, and accountability, and that the benefits of AI should be enjoyed by high and low-income countries and should not be restricted to a small group of ultra-rich oligarchs. He also expressed concerns about having enough clean electricity for AI.
How we make sure that we have the energy to power AI in a clean enough way and an efficient enough way that's not going to set us back in our fight to reduce carbon emissions. How we move forward in responsible AI that actually isn't used for evil or to divide or to cause misinformation and disinformation to further destabilize our democracies. It's so easy in this world to see fears, to see divisions. The more we can spend looking at how we empower our small businesses, individuals, our researchers, future generations, to be able to see further, do more, succeed better in ways that are truly shared around the world is essential. Artificial intelligence is going to have the kind of impact on our society that the development of electricity did. And yet there are still big parts of this world that over 100 years later still don't have access to electricity. If we have a similar delay in terms of AI adoption around the world, the consequences will be even more catastrophic and more painful, not just for those who don't have access to it, but for the divisions and the conflicts that will result.
Stéphane Dion, Canada's ambassador to France, says President Donald Trump is violating international law when he threatens to use military force to acquire Greenland. The president has floated the idea more than once since taking office, calling the Danish territory in the Arctic critical to U.S. and world security.
What kind of conversations are you having with Denmark? Because Trump is also threatening to take over Greenland.
Of course, we talk to all our friends and with Denmark, and we know that we are custody for the Arctic. Canada is responsible for 25% of the Arctic. So we work with Denmark, we work with Norway, with all our friends, and there's no way that we will consider normal that countries are threatening themselves. You know that according to international law, it's not only to invade a neighbor that is against international law and the Charter of the UN, it is to threaten. So we are against that, of course. I'm just saying the facts of the law. Do what you want with it. But the international law said you don't threaten your neighbors.
Meanwhile, federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says his government would build a permanent military base in Nunavut to defend the Arctic Circle if he's elected. Poilievre is also pledging to double the number of Canadian Rangers to 4,000 members, and he's promising to buy 4 heavy icebreakers, with the Canadian Coast Guard and Royal Canadian Navy each receiving 2 by 2029. Ottawa announced that 2 new icebreakers will be built for the Coast Guard last year, and those projects are in the design phase.
Let me be clear. The Canadian Arctic belongs to Canadians, and Canadians will take back control of their Arctic waters, Arctic skies, and Arctic land. After 9 years of liberal incompetence and disdain, our military is weakened and our allies no longer respect us. Our safety, territory, and trade with the U.S. requires we take back control of our north. This gigantic area makes up 40% of our land mass and 75% of our coastline. 140,000 patriotic Canadians call it home across 72 communities.
A tragic situation in Guatemala. At least 51 people have died after a bus plunged off a bridge today on the outskirts of Guatemala City. Firefighting spokesman Edwin Villagrán said a multi-vehicle crash caused the bus to veer off the bridge just before dawn. The bus apparently fell about 35 meters into the stream below, landing upside down, partially submerged. There are also multiple people with serious injuries, and the death toll could yet rise. Firefighters say that children were among the victims. President Bernardo Avello has declared a day of national mourning. After several days of silence after allegations of government corruption regarding the procurement and contracting processes of Alberta Health Services, over the weekend, Alberta Premier Smith responded with a statement acknowledging the troubling nature of the allegations and that she is writing Auditor General Doug Wiley to ask for an expedited review. She says she's telling her officials to be fully transparent in order to identify any potential wrongdoing, correct it, and address it properly. Smith has denied any personal involvement. Meanwhile, as a group of Canadian provincial premiers get ready to travel to Washington, D.C. on Wednesday to meet with politicians and business leaders to discuss trade and border security issues, Danielle Smith is calling on Ottawa to reverse what she calls soft-on-crime federal laws as a way to deal with U.S. President Donald Trump. She wants the PM to reintroduce mandatory minimum jail sentences for drug offenders, or to allow the province of Alberta to take over all prosecutions under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, so that drug traffickers end up behind bars. Smith also expressed frustration that the Prime Minister still has not appointed a fentanyl czar. 2 federal Liberal cabinet ministers announced today that they will not be seeking re-election. Justice Minister Arif Virani says the past decade in public office has taken a toll on his family. The other member of Parliament is Mary Ng, the Minister for Export Promotion, International Trade and Economic Development. They are the latest Liberal MPs to decline to seek re-election as the party faces an uphill battle against a popular Conservative party. The news comes as the Liberal Party gets set to choose a new leader in March. The leadership hopefuls include former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, MP Karina Gold, and former Liberal MPs Frank Baylis and Ruby Dalla. In international news, Hamas will delay the next hostage release after accusing Israel of violating their ceasefire agreement. Israel and Hamas are in the midst of a 6-week ceasefire, during which Hamas is releasing dozens of the hostages captured in its 2023 attack in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. The next exchange had been scheduled for Saturday, but Hamas claims that it's being pushed back because Israel has delayed allowing displaced Palestinians to return to northern Gaza and has targeted them with airstrikes and failed to facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid as agreed. In local news, Lethbridge police say they have charged 2 people after seizing significant quantities of fentanyl and methamphetamine. Police say they conducted a traffic stop after midnight on February the 8th after they observed a vehicle conducting multiple traffic violations. Police discovered that the driver was suspended, was breaching conditions on a release order, and is wanted for outstanding warrants. Police recovered nearly 170 grams of meth, 279 grams of fentanyl, and 2 fake license plates. Both the driver and the occupant of the vehicle were charged. 37-year-old Dakota Blaker Cisco was charged with 3 counts of possession of a controlled substance for trafficking purposes, and 44-year-old Daniel James Chrysler is charged with failing to comply with conditions of a release order. Lethbridge witnessed a substantial increase in both rental and housing prices over the last year. According to the Alberta Real Estate Association, the city saw a 14.1% increase in residential housing prices year over year, bringing the overall average price to $416,000. That is only outpaced by Grande Prairie, Alberta, with an increase of 19.2%. Interestingly, the cost to purchase a Lethbridge apartment increased by 87.5% from last year. The average price is now over $326,000. Lethbridge also experienced one of the highest rent increases in the country. The National Rent Report indicates that rent prices with a 1-bedroom apartment increased 14.6% to $1,393 per month, and 2-bedroom units rising to $1,559, up 10.7% from last year.
What you're seeing in Lethbridge is very much similar to the national housing situation. There is significantly more demand than there is supply. And anytime demand outstrips supply, prices increase. So, particularly for rental accommodation, you think about Lethbridge's population, we grew almost 4% last year, and we're not adding housing inventory as quickly as population grows. The City of Lethbridge does have a housing strategy. There are some efforts to rewrite the land use bylaw to make densification, making building more multifamily easier, but you're not going to see those changes probably until 2026. So in the short term, I would expect there's going to continue to be upward pressure on prices for both rentals and home sales.
The average rent rates in Alberta remained nearly unchanged, with the monthly price of a 1-bedroom unit priced at $1,480 and a 2-bedroom unit at $1,810. Lethbridge remains below the provincial average. Sexual health is an important aspect of our overall well-being. This is Sexual Health Week, which has been dedicated to raising awareness about key issues in sexual health, education, and health care. The University of Lethbridge Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Prevention Coordinator, Leah Webster, highlights how education and prevention are essential when it comes to raising awareness.
Sexual Health Week provides a really great opportunity for us to engage with students, to be out on campus and having conversations about consent, about healthy relationships, about sexual and gender-based violence prevention, encouraging students to talk about boundaries, communication, what does a healthy relationship look like to them. Campuses are a high-risk space for sexual violence, just with some of the activities that students participate in, whether that be hanging out with people they just met, the increased partying dynamic. Also, for a lot of students, a new space, so they don't necessarily know the community that well. So campuses as a whole are considered a higher risk space for sexual violence. So it's important that we have resources to support people who are impacted, but then also really focusing on that prevention piece. Counseling available to students here on campus. We have our wellness support workers, student support workers, Akiskani Indigenous resources. We have the International Center, our health center. So we actually have a lot of resources that kind of work together.
The university will be hosting numerous events on campus to raise awareness. And an encouraging story from South Africa, as scholars there are lending their voices to a creative project which uses podcasts to deliver the gospel message in a fresh, modern format aimed at children. Mark Roughton from the Global News Alliance has the story.
But which family can he be from? I'm so hungry. I can eat a whole horse right now.
Tell us what young voices retelling age-old stories. Pastor Garth van Niekerk is working with these children to create life-changing content for their peers.
By kids, for kids. Just the whole idea that kids could be telling these stories in such an exciting and colourful way that kids listening will engage with it much better.
Once a week, a dedicated group meets to record their latest podcast episode. The original Storytime with Joy series included 2 adult characters supporting the young voice artists.
The way that it's translated into such a easy to digest script for everyone to understand, and the insights that come out and just the conversational style. But it was really, really lovely to do. Yeah, I could really see the heart behind it, to equip our children with truths that they can hold on to for the rest of their lives.
Being with Uncle Garth, it's fun. Laughing, like recording yourself on the podcast, to hear your voice, it's fun.
The junior voice artists have quickly become confident of their own creative abilities. Their idea for a newscast made up entirely of child characters is sending the podcast in a fresh new direction.
I am Barry Benson Brown for Rickety Rockstar News.
The moment we did that show, it was the first show where it was just the kids telling the story. I thought, man, this is really nice. These kids have now matured to a point where they could carry all the dialogue for a story. And at that point, it wasn't long before we realized we could actually have a hard copy book and then have the kids record the story so that we now have an audio book to go along with somebody reading that story.
Each book in the current series presents the lowdown on an Old Testament character. The books are illustrated by Garth, and the team works together to create accompanying audiobooks. The recording process is adding another layer of creativity to the entertaining stories.
A story could change my life.
As they start reading, very often the kids will throw in a joke or sometimes read something wrong, and it will come out funny, it will come out sweeter or more natural, and then we actually afterwards go and adapt the script, just because the natural flow just comes out more beautiful.
Podcast episodes are not only about retelling biblical stories. An entire series emerged from an invitation to children to submit their tricky questions to the creative team.
Why can't we see God, even though He's right here with us?
So that was a whole series that we walked through, and some of them were really brain scratchers for ourselves, just to say, how do you tell this to a kid in a creative way and in a way that parents will feel safe actually having their kids listen to it?
I think it's so important, if anything, that number one, it shows children where they can go to for their source of truth. But number two, the heart behind it is to evoke a hunger for the Word of God, to really jump in and see, like, okay, I'm being bullied at school. What can I find in the Bible that will solve this problem?
It's quite cool. It's actually quite amazing that you can just have fun whilst changing other people's lives.
More than 3 years since their first recording, the original crew members continue to devote time each week to the creation of fresh new podcasts, each episode voiced by the children for the children. Mark Roughton in Cape Town, reporting for the Global News Alliance.
My, oh my, there just seems to be no end in sight for this cold spell. On the bright side, we're not as cold as Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Weather details are on the way right after the break. Let's take a look at our chilly forecast. Tonight, partly cloudy after midnight, a low of -23, and that wind chill near -34. There is, of course, a risk of frostbite with that. Tuesday, a mix of sun and cloud with a 30% chance of flurries in the afternoon. The wind becoming north 20 kilometers an hour, gusting to 40 late in the morning, getting up to a high of -13. Wind chill will still be -22 in the afternoon, though, and dipping down to an overnight low of -26. Wednesday, we'll get a bit of relief, sunshine and -10 for a high. Much the same for Thursday, sunny and -13, but cooling off again on Friday. Cloudy with a 60% chance of flurries and a high of only -19. Then dropping to an overnight low of -25. Heading into the weekend, Saturday, a mix of sun and cloud with a 30% chance of flurries, a high of -17, and warming up a bit for Sunday, cloudy and a high of -8. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is +1 with an average low of -11. The record high was 16 degrees set back in 1919, and the record low was a frigid -38 set back in 1939. The sun rose at 7:50 and will set at 5:42. Let's see how Tuesday is shaping up across Canada. Some sunshine in store for the west coast. A high of +1 in Victoria, along with northeast winds gusting up to 50 km. Sunny and 0 in Vancouver. Moving to the prairies, a 60% chance of flurries for Calgary with a high of -14. Similar conditions in Edmonton, flurries and -18. Regina continues to be cold with -21 with some light snow. Almost identical in Saskatoon, a chance of light snow with a high of only -24. And the deep freeze continues in Manitoba with sunshine and a high of -21 for Winnipeg. Moving to Ontario, Toronto, a 40% chance of flurries with a high of -2. Much the same in Ottawa, flurries with a high of -5. In Montreal, they are expecting a high of -4 with a 40% chance of flurries. In Atlantic Canada, a 40% chance of flurries for Fredericton with a high of -6, a 30% chance of flurries and -3 for Halifax, mainly cloudy for St. John's and a high of -9. In Charlottetown, sunny skies and a high of -10 for Tuesday. The Canadian Steel Producers Association is deeply concerned about Donald Trump's latest tariff threat. The CEO says when the U.S. president implemented tariffs on Canadian steel in 2018, there were massive disruptions that hurt both countries. Now, Catherine Cobden is calling on Ottawa to act again to fight the threat and be ready to retaliate. Trump today announced 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports into the U.S., including those coming from Canada and Mexico. Air Transat says it will no longer allow carry-on bags for its low-fare customers on most flights. The move by the Montreal-based company is the latest example of discount carrier tactics entering into the mainstream. Beginning Tuesday, passengers flying on Air Transit's Eco Budget and Eco Promo fare classes will have to check their luggage for a fee of between $35 to $50 on flights. The fee is applicable to flights throughout North America and South America. Air Transat says these changes will allow it to offer more competitive fares and align with industry practices. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 215 points to 25,658. The Dow was up 167 to 44,470. The S&P 500 was up 40 points to 6,066, and the Nasdaq was also up 190 points to 19,714. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 149 to 72.49 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 9 cents to 3.30 US. Gold was up 47.86 to 29.0733 US an ounce, and silver was up 25 cents to 32.04 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley is at $6.58, canola is at $14.97, and corn is at $8.59 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was up 110 to 201.88. Feeder cattle March contract was up 323 to 268.13, and lean hogs February contract was up 45 cents to 87.70. And the Canadian dollar was slightly down over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 69.80 US.
And recapping one of our top stories, American President Donald Trump announced today that he will impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports into the U.S. and that there will be no carve-outs for Canada. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he would implement matching tariffs on American steel and aluminum if he was Prime Minister. We'll talk more about the tariffs and other news with our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari coming up right after the break. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. Just days after giving Canada a 30-day reprieve on tariffs, U.S. President Donald Trump announces a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports, including Canada's. So joining us now to discuss this and more is Lisa Daftari, our U.S. correspondent from the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles. Good to have you with us again, Lisa.
Thank you for having me. Great to be back.
Lots to talk about. Tell us a bit more about the steel and aluminum tariff here. What's happening?
So these are the tariffs that Donald Trump has promised and delivered on. Nothing surprising. Of course, there are critics to the tariffs. It's going to start a tariff war. Is this something we really want to do with our very fragile economy in ways? Look, the man's been in office 3 weeks, and the way that he has really just come in has really fulfilled the promises that he said he's going to make, including the tariffs. So to speak more about the tariffs, look, it's meant to put America first. It's meant to put a boom in our economy, in production, in exports, et cetera. And it already has. The markets are responding to this. The manufacturers obviously are responding to this here in the United States. I apologize to our northern neighbor, my good friends in Canada. I know that will affect all of us, but the theory is this, and it has worked, and we've seen it work in the past. When there's a strong United States, there's a strong Canada, there's a strong Europe, there's a strong Middle East, and it goes that way. We have a long way to go to reinstall the American way of whether it's foreign policy, the economy, global trade, and it just goes to show how far we've departed over the last 4 years alone. And in the first administration, Donald Trump didn't get to do all the things that he promised to do. And it's almost, I don't know, serendipitous that he didn't get elected in 2020, so that now he has come back and says, you know what, I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, because his main goal is to get the United States back on track. And the economy is the one place where he wants to start. He does want to, it seems, work with Canada and Mexico, our northern and southern neighbors. And the reprieves that he has given demonstrate the fact that he's looking for them to come on board. He's not looking for a war of any sort, but he wants them to come on board, not necessarily as the 51st state, but perhaps to work together to get more done.
Okay. I mean, Canada being, I believe, the largest exporter of steel and aluminum to the U.S., does maybe have a bit of a, Trump card, pardon the pun, up our sleeve. So we'll see. Maybe it doesn't last that long because, of course, I mean, that's going to, drive up prices for sure. Now, speaking of making Canada the 51st state, that came up again over the weekend here after our Prime Minister made some comments behind closed doors saying that Trump is serious about doing this. And so we've got lots of Canadian media up in arms about that. I guess part of me kind of thinks, I don't think he's super serious about that. Again, I think it's maybe more of a bargaining chip, again, how Trump operates things. I mean, certainly the Canadian public wouldn't be, overwhelmingly in favor of that, although I was quite surprised to see one of the polls done at about a third of Canadians saying, we'd consider that idea. So pretty interesting, but at the same time, I'm thinking, well, how do you do that? I mean, Trump is not going to invade Canada with the, with the U.S. Army. This is not going to happen, okay?
No.
But I think there'd be economic pressure, yes, but ultimately that's in our hands as Canadians whether to say yes or no to that, I would think.
Yeah, look, for anyone who's been studying Trump, not even his first administration, but the last 20 days, you'd notice that he floats ideas around that are very much outside the box, whether it's about the Middle East, whether it's about the economy, whether it's the domestic issues here in the United States. He sticks something on the wall, and he throws something against the wall, and sees if it sticks around. But I think what he's really trying to do is a few things, and you mentioned a couple of them. Is try to see what the reaction is. Try to see if he could use it as a leveraging point to say, well, here's my idea. You can become the 51st state. And then try to get them to come up with better ideas. Look, when you put up the idea of becoming the 51st state, and then you put the idea of working together on X, Y, and Z in terms of keeping the borders safe, in terms of working together to stabilize the economy in order to, stop the flow of migrants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then that becomes the option B becomes the better option. And all of a sudden you have, you've used that tool of leverage and deterrence and really having an America first policy. So I do think that that's the approach that he's taken. Again, in only 3 weeks, how many crazy ideas has he thrown out there? But are they really crazy?
Yeah, and more to come, I'm sure. So, I mean, word has it that Trump will soon be placing reciprocal tariffs on some imports from the European Union. And I think this is dealing somewhat with the VAT tax, some of the auto imports. Apparently, again, when we get or you get imports of vehicles from Europe, it's a very small tax. I think it's like 2.5% or something like that. But with the VAT tax and some other exports taxes, it's something like 30% for the U.S. going that way. So yeah, I mean, to me that does make sense. So again, is that maybe more of a negotiation thing, or is that going to stick around for a while, you think?
he's equal opportunity when you look at it. So then Canada can't say that Donald Trump's picking on us, right? I think he's looking across the board. And if you recall, Donald Trump, and you may not, but growing up in the late 80s, early 90s in New York, I would frequently see Donald Trump come on local television. And back then, I don't think he had aspirations of becoming president, or maybe way back in the back of his head he did. But he would always talk about the United States getting taken advantage of. And that was something that always bothered him. Whether it's our acronymed organizations, he's already pulling, funding from many of these organizations because he thinks two things. One, that the United States is paying more than our fair share to be a part of these global causes. And number two is that it's not even doing anything, right? This is a waste of taxpayer money. So that's why we see a lot of U.S. aid programs being cut, because they're just crazy. They're frivolous. They have nothing, it's not important, or, taxpayers shouldn't be paying for those things. So I think that this is what we're going to see a continuation, whether it's Europe, the United States, whether it's the Middle East. He's coming up with ideas that will even the playing field as much as possible. I don't think he is naive to believe that these European nations or Canada or Mexico can be on par in terms of the economy, in terms of X, Y, and Z with the United States. But I do think he is at least making the announcement heard that there's a new sheriff in town who wants things to be more fair.
Yep, he's definitely making that loud and clear, and it's fascinating to see the different responses from different nations. Now, Trump also signing an executive order banning transgender women from participating in women's sports, reinforcing the administration's commitment to protecting women's athletics. And so, again, he's shaking up everything, including in the areas of morality. And I know a lot of our viewers were certainly, cheering these kinds of things. And again, varying responses from different organizations around the world and in the States. Now, the NCAA apparently has already started to make some adjustments to this latest thing here as well, right?
Right. And for people who've watched a biological male who's now a female, in a boxing ring or in any other sport with a biological female, you see how unfair that is. And you have all these biological females who have trained their whole lives only to be defeated so quickly by a biological male. It just is not a natural matchup. And I don't want to be, insensitive to those who have, children who are who identify with a gender other than what they were born with. But we have to look at the biological females as well. And I think that this is really more of a common sense measure. I think other than, a certain percentage of the left that disagree with this, most people would look at this and say, okay, the transgender community does exist, but this is not a way that they can compete and not really diminish the rights of those biological females who've been training their whole lives. So I do think that we have more support on this than we know. I think the media tends to pick up the small percentage on the left's voices that are in opposition to this. But I know that a lot of people are cheering this on and do believe that this was a correction that needed to be made.
I think so too. At least, most coffee shops that I hang around, you hear that chatter, and there seems to be support for it. There's always going to be some opposition to that, but again, I think this is maybe more of a protective thing as well, even just physically speaking. Now, the Supreme Court in the U.S. upholding state bans on hormone therapy and puberty blockers for minors. I believe that reverses a previous stance from the Biden administration, right, and affirms the state's rights in healthcare decisions. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is much more of the same, which is this common sense approach to, these issues are coming up. Is the media really making it more of an issue than it actually is? Probably, but there is a percentage of the population that is looking to do that. Now, do they need to start at such a young age? No, they sometimes learn to, or they sometimes then regret it, or sometimes they get to a certain age and want to make that decision on their own, and that's fine. But we had instances where parents were not being notified. We had instances where and that is just wrong, regardless of what medical procedure we're talking about. And in this case, we're talking about things that are very difficult to reverse. And then there have been interviews with, young adults who have regretted the decision and now, must live with it. So I think, look, this is all to say, yes, these people exist and we want to be sensitive to them, but no, we do not have to have legislation across the board that allows, that kind of takes parents out of the picture, that, offers children hormones that, again, are not reversible, and really common sense. Let's move forward with common sense.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about the leader of a country, of course, really the leader of the free world in that sense, making statements like this, signing things into order here, and the Supreme Court making decisions here as well that influence. It just makes it freer for people to speak up without feeling like they're going to get canceled and stomped on, whatever. And really, I think it's a majority of people, and they're saying, hey, you know what? It's okay to communicate these things, to voice your opinions. It's going to be all right, and then we'll make some common sense decisions here. And it just brings a lot of peace, I think, to the nation, frankly. But
I just want to add one thing, Paul. I think Donald Trump is not a big regulatory, big government leader, meaning he wouldn't want to go after all these different issues and regulate and to legislate and legislate. It's because the pendulum has swung so far in one direction. Again, this doesn't say that these individuals don't exist. It's to say that the protocols that are in place are dangerous even to those individuals. So let's come back to the center and look at it with common sense. And that's why he's getting involved, again, in only 3 weeks, touching many of these topics.
Yeah, it actually expresses concern for the people, even that these legislative orders are going against in one sense, but it's actually out of concern for their health as well. So we've got to ponder these things. Now, a U.S. federal judge placing a temporary restraining order on people from Doge, limiting their access to the Treasury Department's payment system records. Now, a lot of controversy over this, of course. Trump administration trying to have that overturned. But what does that mean for people like Elon Musk? Now, there's lots of pushback, of course. Should Elon Musk, who's a private individual, have access to people's personal records that way? So I understand that the concern on that as well. On the other hand, is this also maybe an effort to stop people like Elon and the Trump administration from, finding all these incredible, terrible spending habits that we have, going to things that most people would say, what on earth are you spending our tax dollars on that for?
I urge everyone to go and take a look at the long list of efforts and initiatives that the United States has been funding with taxpayer money to the tune of billions of dollars. It's mind-blowing that any government, any country would be funding these silly, frivolous, just ridiculous causes and efforts. Elon Musk was appointed by Donald Trump, so I don't understand what the upheaval is about his position. This agency was created, and it was created to do exactly what it is doing, which is pointing out how our taxpayer money has been wasted and creating more surplus. I don't understand why that's an issue. Now, if there's a cause that you believe in and you believe that those funds are being cut from your cause, well, you need to reapply for a government grant and prove to the government that this is a cause that they should be giving a grant for, and maybe you'll be awarded another grant. But for now, they're cutting what they believe to be frivolous and not necessary. When people say, wow, he has access to this government files and this and that. Yes, because that's what he's doing. And he's been appointed. There's so much more to say about this, but I do urge people without a partisan view to kind of go and look at the causes that have been supported by U.S. aid, and then to make a decision based on that, not on what you're hearing, not what, not the memes, not what's going on Instagram, but to truly understand what they have uncovered.
All right. Briefly, can you just give us a quick thought here on the prisoner exchange that apparently is scheduled for Saturday is going to be delayed now over apparent Israeli truce violations, at least from Hamas's point of view. Where's that going?
This is horrific. This is breaking news that as of this morning that Hamas has decided to kind of renege on this coming Saturday's hostage, the hostage release, where they're getting Palestinian prisoners back from Israel. They claim that Israel hasn't kept their part of the deal, whereas we know for a fact that Hamas, a terror organization, has not kept their part of the deal. And the way that they have paraded these civilian hostages out of Gaza, really giving them that last psychological scare and terrorizing them. One man, for example, that was let go, they forced him to say, "I can't wait to see my wife and children," knowing that they had already murdered his wife and children and he wasn't going back to them. This is what they do. If you look at these hostages, emaciated, just horrific, the way that they lived in tunnels and were starved, and now Hamas pulling back on this very fragile ceasefire / hostage release deal that had been struck in Qatar. Look, this would be the time for Israel to start the war back up, because that's what needs to be done. Terror organizations only understand the language of might, and this is what needs to be done. But hopefully with Donald Trump in office, there can be a better positioning for Israel and for the West to fight the ideological war of terror.
Yeah, let's believe for good things to come yet amidst this horrible situation there. I want to see these families reunited. Lisa, thanks so much for your time again today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Our U.S. correspondent, Lisa Daftari, from the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles.
At some point in our life, we will experience the loss of a loved one and we'll grieve that loss, but we might not know exactly how to handle the ups and downs that come with this. So what are some healthy ways to go through the grieving process? Well, joining me to share some advice on this is Siobhan Parr, who is a pastor of church life at Lethbridge Evangelical Free Church, and Joanne Penner-Heron. Together they lead the Grief Share Loss and Support Group. Ladies, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Okay, so first off, can you maybe give us a snapshot of what your Grief Share Support Group is about and what people would experience if they dropped into one of your gatherings?
Sure. So Grief Share is a group faith-based program, and it's offered to anyone who is grieving the loss of a loved one through death. It is a 13-week program with 13 sessions. And when you come to this group, you come to look for support. We offer care, encouragement, lots of listening. Videos are offered. First of all, there are 3 parts to each week. There's a video produced by Church Initiative, which has excellent counselors, pastors, and people speaking of their experiences during grief. And then there's a discussion time about the video. So we all share together our own emotional pain and things we are working through. And then following that, each participant goes home with a workbook and they reflect on questions each week and come back and we carry on to another area of grief. So it's a sharing of our loss, and it's faith-based, which gives us a very strong faith support to build our healing upon.
Right, 13 weeks. Okay, that's a long
Yes.
process there. All right.
It is fairly.
Okay. How often do you have these sessions, I guess?
Well, we have them as needed, I would like to suggest. So there are other churches in town who run the Grief Share program as well, and we try not to overlap and offer them at the same time. So we are in conversation with them, and if you're offering it one semester, then we won't. So it's a little unpredictable to just say actual times and schedules. But if you go on the website, the griefshare.org website, you can see what's offered in Lethbridge each semester, and people can go wherever they like.
Are these 1-hour sessions? You may have mentioned already.
They're 2-hour sessions, at least because there's time for the video and the discussion and joining together as well. There are some options to do groups online. Our current version of that is to do it completely in person, but it's something that we might be looking at in the future as well, just as times change. But the community and fellowship is very important part of it as well. So
Yeah.
we're leaning into the
That-
in person.
That really makes sense, and building those connections 100%. So now I've heard that grief has several stages that we tend to go through. So can you maybe share those with us?
There's 5 common stages of grief. It's from the Kubler-Ross. Her book came out in the 60s on death and dying.
Psychology, yes.
And it's really set the stage for the different phases. Originally, it was thought that it was maybe a linear progression, is that you go through each one individually, but we understand it more of it's like in waves. Grief comes in waves. So the standard 5 that we're looking at is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But there could be times, you've come to the point of acceptance, but then anger creeps up as well. So it's a process where different things can pop up at different times as well. But those are the traditional ones that we'll be dealing with and understanding and working through as well.
And of course, they do say that people grieve in different ways, and some people are more emotional, some like to be kind of left alone, others maybe need to be around people, right? So I mean, there's no a scenario where everyone goes through this the same way, right?
No, it's very unpredictable and very unique and individual. And we grieve depending on our age, our stage, the extent of our relationships. We deal according to personality, as you just suggested. We can be external grievers and wear our grief very overtly. We can be internal grievers and manage our grief differently. So even in one household, you could have 2 or 3 or 4 people all grieving somewhat differently. And to understand that is really helpful. It's helpful to support each other, and it's helpful to walk through the whole process to health at the end of it all.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've heard also that regret is a common emotion in the grief process. Why would that be?
With regrets, it's not just sadness and grief. Grief brings out many emotions, and some of those might come from the things that you didn't say to the person while they were alive, the things that you wish you would have done if you just had one more moment with them. What would change? Or maybe the actions that led to their death. There could be some regrets around that. If I'd picked up that phone call, if I'd just done this one thing. That's what makes it quite complex and hard to deal with by yourself as well. And this process, it helps to be able to talk about things, to normalize just the amount of intense emotions that people could be feeling.
Oh, 100%.
And helps us learn how to helps us learn how to manage feelings of guilt that can arise from all of these if onlys. If only I had, and then guilt ensues sometimes after that.
Yeah, guilt, regret, and I would imagine
Yes.
loneliness is often an issue that's part of the grieving process as well, right? So what are maybe some unhealthy methods that people use to deal with their grief? And is there a way that we can help someone who's maybe spiraling downward?
So the part of grief is the loneliness, as you mentioned. You're going to experience a loneliness because it's the loss of someone that you loved in your life, in this grief that we're dealing with. And so a lot of times for spouses as well, there's a definite loss of someone who was there with them, perhaps all the time throughout their lifetime. When it changes to so the loneliness is going to be normal, but then when it becomes unhealthy, we see extreme isolation, cutting yourself off from others and those other connections as well. Sometimes you need to be alone. Sometimes you need to have that time to yourself to be able to cry. But when it becomes withdrawing from the world, that starts to become unhealthy. Other methods then that come in is someone may try and numb the pain that they're feeling through the use of substances to escape some of the things that they're feeling, which you can understand, but it can spiral wrong very quickly. So in those circumstances, we ask that people reach out help. And if they're not able to reach out themselves, the friends and family are able to come alongside them and to just spend time with them, to encourage them to get the help, to increase the connections that they have with others, so that the unhealthy methods aren't the primary methods that people turn to.
Right. It's got to be such a balancing act, because at the same time, you should never tell someone who's grieving that they should be over it by now, right?
That's very right. Very right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So with that said, when friends and relatives are maybe grieving, oftentimes we don't know what to say or what to do.
That's right.
So what are some do's and don'ts of how to, kind of talk to somebody who is going through this?
Well, probably the most important thing we can do is to just think before we speak, and listen a lot. A touch, a hug, if that's appropriate and accepted, is really welcome, to let them know we are here, that we are empathetic, but to listen before we speak. And sometimes the only a very neutral but caring thing to say is, I'm just so sorry for your loss, and I have no words. I loved your partner. I loved your person, or I didn't know them very well, but I've heard such good things. I am so sorry. And probably contrasted to that would be a very unhelpful response might be, oh, I know just how you're feeling. I went through this. And while that may have threads of truth, we do not know how somebody else is feeling. So to impose and suggest that we do is not helpful, because nobody really understands our particular pain. And so it's something that that it takes some thought. I think we just need to not believe that we have the answers for somebody who's grieving, but we need to learn with them, walk alongside. Another thing that's very helpful is to not pretend we know what they need, and just bring over, the 15th lasagna, which is really tasty, but that's a lot of food possibly. And just say, I'll call you next week and check in and see what you need then. And there are varieties of ways. How would you like me to come and vacuum your home on Friday? Would that be helpful? And instead of presuming that we know what people need. So it's a very empathetic response and a listening response more than anything. Let them talk about their loved one. They need to. They need to talk a lot about their loved one, and we need to listen.
That's really.
So those are some helpful things.
Really good advice there. Thank you for that. Now, what advice might you have for people who don't seem to be able to move on with the new normal in their life, and they seem kind of stuck in constant grief? And there's no real timeline, right? Everybody's different.
That's right.
Yeah. It's different for each person. It really is. It's different for each person, and what a new normal may look like, to go back to discover what that might be. What the person is looking for, they might not know, that we're trying to help them see, is that eventually they might be able to come to a place where the feelings that they're experiencing from the loss are less overwhelming at that time. And that might be the new normal for them.
It may be, but in terms of getting unstuck, I think to help people move forward with a purpose, and Grief Share is very good for that. We can address issues that might be holding us back. And, there's a lovely saying that I really have used a lot in my own life, and that is that memories are not meant to hold us hostage. So we are in the same circle of self-muddling, but they're meant to transform us. And so you move forward with purpose in this whole process of transformation. So, and then that becomes a new normal that you can greet and embrace and live with. But we need support for that. And Grief Share certainly helps support people in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it helpful for people to maybe write down their thoughts and emotions in a journal?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure.
I would suggest that journaling is integral to this program, and don't let anyone be kind of scared off by that at all if you haven't been writing. But we each receive a participant workbook. And in that workbook, there is space to write down your own thoughts and come back to the class with what you've written. You don't need to share it with anybody at all, but it helps us to sort through and clarify our emotions. And if we can clarify with a writing process, that can be the most healing thing, and we never really recognize our pain and the circle of chaos till we see it on paper. And we can move through that. It gives us ideas for how to move through that. So journaling is really a key thing, wouldn't you say?
I love it. It gives a way to get all of the emotions out. You don't have to stop your thoughts or regulate. You just put it all onto the page, everything that you're thinking, that you're feeling, that you're going through, and it helps to be able to express that in your own way that you can hold privately as well. You don't need to share that, but it's important that it does come out.
Yeah, exactly. I would imagine it's very therapeutic.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Very.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we're about out of time here, but I really appreciate you ladies for joining me today and talking about this really hard subject.
Yeah. It is, but it's also, we can hold joy and sorrow in two hands, and we can experience alternately, as we move through this journey, less sorrow and more joy, and some days more sorrow and less joy. But if we understand the process of how to allow ourselves to embrace a new way of living and a new normal, then we come through whole on the other side.
Absolutely. Well, Pastor Siobhan and Joanne, thanks so much for joining me
You're
today.
very welcome. You're very welcome.
Pastor Siobhan Parr and Joanne Panner-Heron lead the Grief Share Loss and Support Group at Lethbridge Evangelical Free Church. So great to have them on today. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.